Your feet are lying to you. Right now, wrapped in socks and shoes, they feel like the softest, most delicate part of you, cut off from the ground, almost helpless. And you probably assume it's always been that way, that humans have basically always worn something on their feet. But here's the strange part. For almost the entire time humans have existed, we didn't. Millions of years, barefoot, on rock, on ice, on thorns, on burning sand. And then, at one specific moment in the deep past, that changed forever. The problem is finding when, because the first shoes have almost completely vanished from history, and the way scientists finally track them down is so clever, it borders on detective work, reading a clue hidden inside your own body. Think about what a shoe actually is. Leather, grass, bark, animal hide, soft things, rotting things. Bury a stone tool for 50,000 years, and you'll still find it. Bury a sandal, and the earth simply eats it. Within a few seasons, it's gone. So archaeologists had a nightmare on their hands. The single most personal piece of technology humans ever made, the thing we put on our bodies every single day, is almost invisible in the record. It's like trying to find a ghost. For decades, the honest answer to when did we start wearing shoes was a shrug. We had a handful of ancient sandals, a few thousand years old. That was it. Everyone assumed that was roughly the beginning. They were wrong by tens of thousands of years, and the proof wasn't in the ground at all. To understand how they found it, you have to understand your own foot first. Look down. You've got a big toe, thick, strong, built to push you off the ground with every step. And then 4 smaller toes beside it. When you walk barefoot, those little toes do real work. They grip, they flex, they press hard into the earth to balance you and drive you forward. And bone is alive. It responds to stress. Push on a bone your whole life, and it grows thick and strong to handle the load. That's not a theory. It's why a tennis player's racket arm has denser bone than the other. So here's the question a scientist named Erik Trinkaus asked. What happens to those little toes when you put a shoe underneath them? The shoe takes the strain. The sole spreads the force. Those little toes stop working so hard, and over a lifetime, they get thinner, weaker, more delicate. While the big toe, still doing its job, stays strong. Do you see what that means? A skeleton can't hide whether it wore shoes. It's written in the toes. So Trinkaus started measuring ancient foot bones from all over the world, and he found a line, a moment in time where everything shifts. Go back far enough, to the Neanderthals, to the earliest modern humans, and the little toes are thick, robust, powerful. The feet of people who spent every day gripping bare ground. But then, around 40,000 years ago, the little toes start shrinking. No shoe was found, no sandal survived, but the bones confess. Right around then, somewhere in the cold of the Ice Age, humans started wrapping their feet in something sturdy, and their skeletons changed to match. One of the clearest examples came from a cave in China called Tianyuan. A man who died roughly 40,000 years ago. Strong legs, powerful body, and strangely delicate little toes. The feet of someone who wore real shoes 20,000 years before farming even existed. But hold on. If shoes are that old, why would people suddenly bother? Humans had gone barefoot for millions of years. What changed? The answer is written in ice. Because this is exactly the era when our ancestors were pushing north into a frozen, brutal Ice Age world of Europe and Siberia. And frozen ground doesn't care how tough your feet are. Bare skin on ice doesn't toughen up. It dies. It blackens. You lose toes, then feet, then your life. Suddenly, a warm wrap of hide around your foot isn't a comfort. It's the difference between surviving the winter and not. Shoes weren't invented for style. They were invented to keep us alive in a world trying to freeze us to death. And here's what makes it beautiful. Nobody handed this idea around. Across the whole planet, in places that had never heard of each other, humans looked down at their freezing, bleeding feet and independently thought, I need to cover these. The shoe wasn't invented once. It was invented again and again and again. Which brings us to a haunting question. If people were wearing shoes 40,000 years ago, where are they? For the longest time, we had nothing. And then, very rarely, in the few places on Earth strange enough to preserve the impossible, they started turning up. In a dry cave in Oregon, archaeologists found sandals woven from sagebrush bark. Careful, twined, deliberate work. When they finally dated them, the number stunned everyone. Around 10,000 years old. Someone sat down, gathered bark, and wove footwear 100 centuries ago, and it survived, sitting in the dark, waiting for us to find it. In a cave in Spain, sandals of woven grass, roughly 6,000 years old, the oldest footwear in Europe. And the people who made them didn't just lash some plants together. They dried the grass for weeks, soaked it, worked it soft. This was a craft. A skill passed down, refined, taught. But the moment that really hits you isn't a sandal at all. High in the Alps, frozen in ice for over 5,000 years, they found a man. We call him Ötzi. The ice preserved almost everything, including what was still on his feet. And his shoes were engineering. A bearskin sole, worn fur side down for grip, a deerskin upper, an inner net of woven bark holding a stuffing of soft grass, insulation, packed around his foot like a primitive sock. An expert later rebuilt them and hiked across freezing mountains without a single frozen toe. 5,000 years ago, a man walked into the mountains in shoes better designed for the cold than most things you could buy today. That's not a caveman fumbling with hide. That's a master. And then, in a cave in Armenia, the oldest leather shoe ever found. 5,500 years old, cut from a single piece of cowhide, laced up, stuffed with grass, shaped to a human foot. Small, about a modern size 7. And when you look at it, the distance collapses. Someone laced that shoe. Someone walked out the door in it. Someone with a life you'll never know slipped it on, exactly the way you did this morning. But notice what these survivors all have in common. Dry caves, solid ice, freak accidents of preservation. For every ancient shoe we found, there were countless millions we never will, worn, walked in, and quietly returned to the earth. Which is why the real answer to our question was never going to come from a shoe. It had to come from us, from the bones. From those little toes that grew thin the day we lifted our feet off the cold ground for good. And that leaves one last strange thought. Every time your ancestors put something between their skin and the earth, they gained the whole world. Ice, mountains, deserts, continents they could never have crossed barefoot. Shoes didn't just protect us, they carried us into every corner of the planet. But we paid for it. Those soft, sensitive feet you have right now, they're not a flaw, they're a record. 40,000 years of never quite touching the ground again. Your feet forgot how to grip the earth because your ancestors decided they'd rather conquer it. So the next time you kick off your shoes and feel that little jolt as bare skin meets cold floor, pay attention to it. That feeling is ancient. It's the ghost of who we were before one freezing night in the Ice Age changed our species forever. If this is the kind of history that makes you see your own body differently, stick around, because the next story goes even deeper into the strange things your ancestors left hidden inside you.